Sometimes in life, a person has to pick between their own freedom and the souls they brought into the world. A lot of us will never have to make a choice like that. But Sallie Crane had to deal with it 3 times. It was 1853. And in western Alabama, along the Tombigbee River, a woman stood at the edge of a thick forest. Her feet were hurting, and her dress was torn from running all day. She could see Canada, the North, and the freedom that came with it. She could live a life without having to answer to anyone. In front of her, there was something more valuable to her than her own breath back in those dark woods, past the men with dogs and guns. It was her children. She would make this trip to freedom 3 times. She would go back 3 times. She would go through things in the time between escapes that would push the limits of what a person can handle. But we need to know more about the world that Sallie Crane lived in before we can understand why she made the decisions that would shape her life. A place where love. It could turn into the most dangerous weapon of all. Before we go on with Sallie's amazing story, please hit like if you like these forgotten parts of American history. With your help, we can bring these voices back from the dead. There was a plantation called Thornton in Clark County, Alabama. It was about 15 miles from Grove Hill, a growing town. It wasn't the county's biggest plantation. It was well off, but there were estates along the river that were twice as big as it. 300 acres of cotton, a main house with a simple, elegant style, and 42 slaves who worked in the fields from dawn until the sun went down. The land was given to Robert Thornton by his father in 1848. He was thought of as a modern plantation owner at 32 years old. He didn't personally spank his slaves. Instead, he gave that job to his overseer. He carefully kept track of what he made and how much he spent. He thought he was a good man because he went to church every Sunday. Everyone in the county knew his wife Margaret, for her weak constitution and frequent nerve problems. She rarely left her bedroom upstairs, and the senior house slaves, the most important of whom was a woman named Sallie, ran the house. Sallie was born on the plantation in 1823. Her mother was a field worker named Ruth, and her father was a white man whose name no one spoke out loud, but who was known to have been a traveling merchant who had come to the plantation when Ruth was 15. Sallie's lighter skin meant she would never work in the fields. She was brought into the main house when she was 7 years old to learn how to be a housekeeper. She quickly learned. By age 14, she was in charge of the whole house, overseeing the cooking, cleaning, and laundry, making sure that Mrs. Thornton's strict dietary needs were met and that Mr. Thornton's shirts were pressed to perfection, and making sure that the house ran like a well-oiled machine. By all accounts, she was very valuable, and Robert Thornton thought that valuable things should be close by. Sallie was 16 years old when she was given a small room off the kitchen. This kept her from living with the other slaves. It was given to her as a reward for her great work. She thought it meant something completely different, a convenience that didn't need to be explained. By the time she was 17, Sallie was expecting her first child. She never said her dad's name, just like her mom never said her name. It was a girl with almost Sallie's face and skin tone when she was born. As light as parchment, everyone on the plantation had to come to some conclusions. For a week, Mrs. Thornton stayed in bed because she was having a nervous attack. Thornton did not react. He carefully wrote down the birth in his ledger in the same way he did for all of his property purchases. Louisa is the name of Sallie's healthy baby girl. Over the next 7 years, they had 3 more children. In 1842, she had another daughter named Beatrice, Thomas in 1844, and then Marcus in 1846. 4 kids, 4. There were souls that held Sallie to the Thornton plantation stronger than any chains. The other slaves got it. She worked in the main house, and her kids had a better life than the kids who were born in the quarters. They were kept out of the fields and fed and clothed better, but they also knew what Sallie had to go through for these small favors. the quiet humiliations that didn't leave any marks but hurt more than a lash could. In 1852, Louisa was 11 years old, which meant she could start learning how to do the things her mother had learned to do around the house. The Beatrix had 9, 7, and 5 years. There were many smart and pretty kids in the group. Sallie taught them their letters behind closed doors, using charcoal on wood when no one was looking. This was a dangerous skill that could get them all whipped if it was found out. She loved them so fiercely that it scared her, because she knew, like all slave mothers, that love had its weak spots. Anytime, the kids could be sold. Just a whim or an accountant's math could be enough to take them away from her. They were able to disappear into the slave trade's huge machinery, and she would never know what happened to them. Sallie thought that the only thing worse than losing them would be for them to stay here and grow up in the shadow of the main house, going through the same quiet decline that had shaped her own life. This thought was the first thing that made her want to run away. Not just freedom for herself, but freedom for her kids too. A life in which they are not just things to be owned, but getting away with 4. It was impossible to have children, the youngest of whom was just past toddlerhood. They would be caught by the dogs in a few hours. They would be sent back, punished, and watched more closely than ever. She would have to plan ahead if she wanted to save them. She would have to get away first, make a home somewhere in the north, and then come back for them. It was risky, and maybe even crazy, but the alternative of doing nothing and letting their fate happen was no longer an option. The thing Sallie didn't know as she made her plans It was in the spring of 1852 that Robert Thornton had to do his own math. However, cotton prices had dropped, he had more debts than assets, and he had 4 young children whose parents were not clear. These children were both a problem and a solution. It was Sallie's desperate hope that met Thornton's cold math that started a chain of events that would become legendary along the Tombic River. A story that was told among the slaves but denied by the whites, but never really forgotten. Around the end of April, Sallie heard the talk that would change everything. She was cleaning the study, which she did every Tuesday afternoon while Mr. Thornton was in Grove Hill on business. But on this particular Tuesday, Thornton got back early and wasn't by himself. Thomas Sykes, from Mobile, ran a slave trade business and was sitting across from him in the leather chair by the window. As Sallie came up behind them with her cleaning supplies, she could hear their voices. She should have told everyone who she was, but Thornton's voice made her pause just outside the door, which seemed a little off. Thornton said that the kids are well-behaved and healthy. The 2 oldest girls are old enough to work in a house right away. The boys are young and strong. Sykes asked, "The mother? She won't be sold. Too valuable here. But things are different with the kids." He got off track and said, "My wife." Sallie could hear the glasses clinking and the whiskey pouring. It would make things less tense around the house. "I can. Give $300 for the whole thing. In the New Orleans market, the older girl might sell for more if she's as light as you say she is. The youngest girl is too young to be worth much. Some homes like it better." Thornton cut him off, his voice suddenly cold. "300 is fine. But there will be some rules. The transaction needs to be done in secret. I don't want the other slaves to bother me. They should be quickly gathered at night with as little noise as possible. When may end, I'll send word." While Sallie stood in the hall, she had cleaning rags in her hands and her heart was beating so fast she thought it might burst. 4 weeks. It would be 4 weeks before her kids were put on a wagon and taken to the deep south to be slaves or sold as property. You have 4 weeks to do something that can't be done. That night she ran, but not with a lot of thought or planning. Instead, she ran with the pure panic of a mother who just found out her kids are going to be taken away. She didn't go in until the house was dark, until she was sure that the Thorntons were sound asleep. Then she just walked out the back door and into the forest. She knew about the plan to help slaves escape. Every slave knew about it, but there were a lot of different stories about the details. Head north. Get to the river. Look for homes that have quilts hung up in certain ways. Trust some people. Keep others away. Even though it was just a rumor, it was all she had. Sally went north through the Alabama wilderness for 3 days. She moved at night and hid during the day, drank from streams, and didn't eat anything. In the distance, she could hear dogs sometimes searching, but it was hard to find them because of the heavy spring rains, and she had rubbed her feet and legs with wild onions to hide her scent. She got to the Tennessee border on the 4th day, tired and hungry. In a small settlement nearby, a freed slave gave her bread and told her to keep going northeast toward Nashville, where she might be able to find people who could help her. He told her the name of a church and how to get in to talk there. Door. In a real and symbolic sense, Sally was at a crossroads. The way to Tennessee, to Nashville, and to freedom was right in front of her. Louisa, Beatrice, Thomas, and Marcus were behind her the whole dangerous distance. She remembered how her oldest daughter liked to sing while she worked and make people laugh. She thought of Beatrice, who was serious and always on the lookout for anything. Her mind went to Thomas. Thomas loved stories and would beg Sally to tell him about places other than the plantation. Marcus came to mind. For 4 weeks, until they were sold, he still sometimes crawled into her bed at night to feel safe. If she kept going north, she might find a place to live, make some money, and then try to buy them. If that takes years, they might be spread out all over the South and impossible to find by then. She would get in trouble if she went back now. They would still be there, though. It looked like the choice was impossible. But for Sally, it was really very easy. Then she turned around and walked south. She showed up. On the 6th night after she escaped, she was back at the Thornton plantation. She went straight to the main house and rang the doorbell. When Robert Thornton opened the door with a candle in his hand, she stood on the porch and said, "I came back. Please don't sell my children." What happened next would be talked about a lot in the years that followed. Some said Thornton was moved by her plea. Some people said that his calculations had just changed. A slave who would choose to go back from. A wise woman realized that freedom was a slave who could be ruled over by her children. No matter what his reason was, Thornton did not whip her. He didn't sell her kids in May like he was supposed to. Instead, he locked Sally in a small storage room under the kitchen for 2 weeks and fed her only 1 meal a day. She could see her kids through a hole in the door, but she couldn't touch them. When he finally let her go, he was very clear about the new plan. The same work would be done by her as before. Her. The children would stay on the plantation, but if she tried to escape again, all 4 of them would be sold right away to the most remote parts of the Deep South, and she would never see them again. It was a question of, "Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Sally replied. She got it right away. She knew that the way she loved her kids had turned into a prison for her, that Thornton now had something against her that was stronger than any chains. She was aware of what she was. Trapped, and her kids were trapped through her. Thornton didn't know that Sally had learned something very important from her first escape. It was possible. There was a north. There was freedom. It was dangerous, but you could get through it. The most important thing was that she knew she had something rare and valuable. Being able to leave everything behind and having the strength to come back. She would get away again. She would have a better plan next time, though. The time after Sally's first. When people ran away, things changed on the Thornton plantation. At first, it was subtle, but over time it became too much. Robert Thornton hired a new guardian named William Pike, who was known for keeping kids from running away. Pike was a short man with pale eyes that never seemed to blink. He had a strange ability to show up wherever slaves were talking quietly to each other. Sometimes people would be in the middle of a sentence when Pike's shadow fell on them. Sally could no longer move around freely. She was no longer able to walk to the room to hang out with the other slaves. The main house told her she couldn't leave without permission. Even though her kids stayed with her, Pike checked on them 3 times a day, as if she were keeping track of stock. Mrs. Thornton came out of her bedroom more often. It seemed like Sally's attempt to escape made her feel better, or maybe the extra supervision in the house made her feel safer. She started keeping an eye on Sally's work herself by standing in doorways and criticizing it. Things that didn't matter before became very important. She would say that the silver isn't bright enough, or this dinner needs more seasoning, or Sally, why are you moving so slowly today? Are you sick? The questions always had a deeper meaning. A hint that Sally might be saving her energy for another attempt to escape, that she wasn't reliable, and that she was boring to watch. But the kids were the ones who were hurt the most by all of this new attention. Louisa was 12 years old, which meant she could start doing real housework. She had to clean the floors, shine the boots, and empty the chamber pots, according to Mrs. Thornton. Tasks that were way below what her skills could handle and were clearly meant to make her look bad. Even though the girl took it in a quiet way, Sally could see the light going out in her eyes and the way she was walking, which made her look like she had learned too early that hope was dangerous. She was put to work in the kitchen with the cook, who had never forgiven Sally for what she did to her. A special place in the family, worked her hard, and told Mrs. Thornton about every little mistake she made. The child's hands were soft from not having to do much hard work as a child, but they got red and raw from washing dishes in hot water. Thomas and Marcus were too young to do real work yet, but Pike started taking them to the fields to train. He told them that they would learn the work that they would eventually do. In the evenings, they came back tired and scared, telling stories about There were field hands who were hit because they moved too slowly or spoke back. Mama Thomas said one night, "Mr. Pike says that children who come from sin become sinners themselves. That's why we need to be corrected more than other children. What does he mean?" Sally held her son and didn't say anything because she couldn't find words to describe how cruel their lives had become. She started to understand that this was the real punishment for running away. Not the 2 weeks in the storage room, but this slow, planned effort to break her spirit by destroying the futures of her children one step at a time. Everything worked. Sally would lie awake at night and stare at the ceiling, wondering if she had made a mistake by coming back. She might have been able to call for help later if she had kept going north and made herself safe. There may have been groups, organizations, or individuals that made it easier for children to be freed from slavery. There's a chance that her strong desire to be with them made things worse for them. These thoughts kept going around in her head like buzzards, feeding on her doubt. In late fall, 1853, Sally had one of these sleepless nights and overheard another conversation. This time, she didn't do it by accident, she did it on purpose. She knew to move quietly through the main house and stand near doorways when Thornton had guests over so she could listen for useful information. This time, the guest was James Thornton was Thornton's brother and ran a plantation in Mississippi. While the 2 men were in the study, Sally stood in the hallway pretending to polish the whole table while straining to hear every word. "You should sell them," James told her. "The older one in particular. It will be easy to deal with Margaret after she sells for a good price." Robert replied that Sally is too valuable. "I can't get her back. Things are easy for her to handle. Margaret also believes in her work. Even if she did. If you don't trust anything else about her, keep Sally, but sell all of the kids. She won't have any reason or power to run once they're gone. You'll be in charge of everything." There was a long pause. Sally's hands were frozen on the table and wouldn't move. James went on to say that the trader from Mobile comes back every 6 months. His next visit is planned for the beginning of January. This might be fixed by the start of the new year. Robert said, "I'll think about it." Finally, Sally went back to her. She was polishing, her movements were stiff, and her mind was racing. January. She might have had less than 2 months. The first escape was hasty and caused by fear. It didn't work because she didn't have a real plan, any resources, or a clear idea of where she was going other than north. What she did wrong taught her important lessons, though. Lessons on the routes, the right time, and how to avoid being caught. She had learned something about herself, which was even more important. She could make it through the trip. She was strong and would not give up. Enough and willing to give up anything for the freedom of her children. The second escape would be different. She would be ready this time. Some mysteries are about what took place. Some are about the risks people are ready to take to change what might happen. Like this channel, if you want to see where Sally's determination takes her. Because what happened next went against everything she thought was possible. When you are constantly being watched, planning an escape takes a special kind of. Sally had never needed to be so sneaky before. Every move had to accomplish 2 things. The obvious goal that made the people who were watching her happy, and the hidden goal that moved her secret plan forward. In the beginning, she was a great slave. She put in more hours, offered to do extra work, and took Mrs. Thornton's criticism with a different nod each time. She taught her kids to be invisible in the same way that slaves had been taught to be invisible for generations, by being quiet and following the rules. In body, but carefully absent in any way that could draw attention or make someone feel bad. Weeks went by. The surveillance got less strict over time. Pike still looked after the kids, but not as often. While Mrs. Thornton still watched, she wasn't as interested. It looked like the message was clear. Sally was broken after her first failed escape, and the threat to her children made her do what she was told. They had to believe this because Sally wanted them to. As she did her chores around the house, she started stealing small things that might not being there, or whose absence could be explained. A kitchen knife about the size of her palm that was hidden in her room under a loose floorboard and wrapped in cloth. 1 or 2 matches at a time were taken from the box and put on the mantel. She said she threw away a blanket with a small burn hole that was meant for the rag pile, but she folded it up and hid it under her mattress. She also stole food, but she was very careful. She made sure the meals she made were just a little less salty and kept the extra salt for herself. She also thought they needed more flour than they did. The extra for bread, and hiding the extra handful by handful, saying the chickens weren't laying well while hiding 2 eggs a week in a tin buried behind the kitchen building. Getting all the things you would need for a trip took weeks, and getting information took even longer. By accident, the other slaves became her network of informants. When they got back to the quarters after a long day's work, Sally had reasons to go there. She brought sick people medicine and messages from the main house, child fixing up clothes. She would only stay for a short time to listen to the conversations and hear the news that got around faster among slaves than through any newspaper. She learned about a freed slave in Mobile who helped runaways get on ships going north. She learned about a Quaker family near the border with Georgia who kept criminals hidden in a cellar under their barn. She found out about a way through the swamps of the Tom Bigby River that even the dogs couldn't find, and a settlement of Maroons who were freed slaves. People who live in the wilderness and might be willing to give travelers a place to stay. The most important thing she learned was about a woman in Tennessee named the Shepherd who ran a network of safe houses from Tennessee to Ohio. The stories about her were always the same, but no one knew her real name. In her own time, she helped more than 50 fugitives get away, and she specialized in the hardest cases, like families with children or pregnant women who other people had given up on, if Sally could get to. The Shepherd, She thought she might be able to get her kids out. Not right away. The second time she tried to escape, she knew it had to be the same as the first time. She would have to fly alone. Once she was safe and had a place to stay, she could send a message back through the network. Plans could be made, and the shepherd could be called. Even though it seemed impossible and like a desperate wish, it was Sallie's only plan. She was ready by the end of November. The goods were kept secret. The route was remembered. It was possible to figure out the time to the hour. When Thornton went to Mobile for business during the week, she would leave on a night with no moon. Pike would still be on the plantation, but he usually fell asleep quickly after drinking in the evening. Sallie knew which floorboards in the main house made noise and which ones didn't. The date was set for December 3rd, 1853. 3 days before she was supposed to leave, though, something strange happened that threw all of her plans off. Louisa rushed into the kitchen in the late afternoon, her face red with fear and excitement. Sallie was making dinner. "Mama," she let out a gasp. "There's a guy here. He came to the quarters to find you. He says your mother has sent him a message." As part of the estate settlement when old Mr. Thornton died, Sallie's mother, Ruth, was sold to a plantation in Georgia 5 years before. Sallie hadn't seen her since then and hadn't heard anything about whether she was still alive. "What man?" Sallie asked slowly. "What did he look like?" "He's young, a house slave from the Crawford place, I think." He added, "His name is Benjamin, and he'll be working in the stable tonight, repairing Mr. Thornton's carriage." He added, "You should come see him after sunset when the work is done." This situation caused alarm. It wasn't like slaves from other plantations just showed up with messages. The time, just a few days before she planned to. Getting away was suspiciously easy. Still, Sallie made her choice based on whether or not her mother had sent word that she was in trouble or had information. Benjamin was the person she would meet. She would be careful, though. After dinner was over and the dishes were washed that night, Sallie told Mrs. Thornton she had to go check on a sick child in the other room. Even though it wasn't a very good reason, Mrs. Thornton was already sleepy from her evening laudanum, so she merely waved Sallie away. While one lantern hung from a beam, the stable was otherwise dark. A figure moving in the shadows caught Sallie's attention. As she got closer, a young man came into the light. Yes, he was young, maybe 20 years old, and walked carefully, like someone who knew how to be careful. He asked in a low voice, "You're Sallie?" "Who sent you?" he told her. "Your mother didn't send me." "I know her, though. She works on a tobacco farm near Augusta, Georgia, where I know she is." "She is fine, in case you were wondering." "Then why are you here?" Benjamin took a nervous look around and then moved closer. "Because the shepherd told me to find you." Sallie took a deep breath. "It's not clear to me what you mean." "You do, yes. White people don't understand how word gets around. People have heard that you want to run again because you failed the first time and came back for your kids. The shepherd wants you to understand that this is wrong." Sallie said, "I didn't ask for her opinion." Her voice was sharper than she meant it to be. "If you run by yourself," she says, "you'll have the same choice again. You'll get as far as freedom, but you'll turn back because your kids are still here. This time, if you turn back, Thornton will whip you or worse, and your kids will be sold out of spite. What should I do?" The question sounded like a plea. Ben took another look around and then took a small piece of cloth out of his pocket. It was dark blue and had a pattern of white thread stars that made it stand out. "Dawn, you know? This?" She shook her head no. "It's a message. If you see this pattern on a quilt hanging from a porch or window, that house is connected to the network. It's safe, but only for one night." He put the cloth between her hands. If you really want to try again, wait until late December, after the trader has come and gone. If your kids are still here after Christmas, it means Thornton has decided to keep them for now. That gives you time. Time to run, but this time do it differently. You could get away, but it would be dangerous, and you'd have to move quickly. Like before, you'd go northeast to Tennessee, but this time you wouldn't stop there. You'd keep going all the way to Ohio, to a town called New Richmond, which is right on the river. The shepherd would meet you there, and she would help you plan something very few people have ever done, going back south to get your kids. But Sally, listen to me. Watch out, this is very dangerous. Most people who try to go back don't make it, they get caught, killed, or find that the people they came back for have already been sold and moved. The shepherd will help you, but she can't promise that you'll succeed. She can only say that she'll try. Sally looked down at the small piece of cloth in her hand. It was a sign, a promise, a possibility. Why would she do this? She doesn't know me. The shepherd thinks that everyone who escapes and makes it back will. Every person who goes back to save their family proves something even stronger. Love is stronger than the chains they use to hold us down. She says, these stories are what keep the rest of us hoping, planning, and believing that freedom is possible. Benjamin started to walk away but stopped and said, one more thing. If you run in December, don't bring anything with you that could be linked to this plantation. Not wearing clothes. That could be used to figure out who you are or where you're from, and don't tell your kids anything. They can't accidentally tell them that you're planning to escape if they don't know you are. He went into the darkness, leaving Sally holding the small piece of cloth by herself in the stable. She didn't move for a long time. She had to decide whether to run in 3 days as planned, or wait and trust a woman she had never met while following a plan that seemed too complicated to understand. It looked even more dangerous than the first one, but in the end, it was really easy to make the choice. Benjamin had a point. She would be in the same tough spot at the same crossroads if she ran by herself again. There would be no going back this time. It would take more than courage for her to save her kids. The shepherd was needed by her. Sally went back to the main house and hid the piece of cloth with her other illegal items. Then she waited, counting down the days until December 3rd. When that day came, she didn't do anything. An event. Watched for the slave trader from Mobile during the dark and cold days of mid-December. He came on December 18th, stayed in Thornton's study for 2 hours, and then left without any children. Sally Crane got away a second time on the night of December 23rd, 1853. The second escape was very different from the first. Sally moved carefully and with purpose, following a route she had learned by heart while carrying things she had carefully hidden. Now she knew what to expect. Being tired, hungry, and constantly. Being afraid of hearing dogs far away. However, knowing more did not make the journey any easier. It might have made things harder for her because she knew so many bad things could happen. The first 3 nights were fine. Sally went northeast through the wilds of Alabama, staying away from roads and crossing streams to throw off any tracking dogs. She followed the exact path Benjamin had described. You should travel until 2 hours before dawn, then find a thick cover and sleep until it gets dark. Eat little, only drink from moving water, and don't leave any. Track. The 4th night, she got to a small farmhouse with a quilt over the window. The shape of the stars that Benjamin had shown her. She carefully walked up to him, looking for any sign of a trap. When she finally knocked, a white woman opened the door, looked at her, and said, "You're expected. Come in." The woman, who never said her name, fed Sally, let her wash, and gave her different clothes that were plain and would have been worn by anyone. Before dawn, she showed Sally a barn a mile to the north where she could rest during the day. The woman said, There's a family there, freed men. You can tell them Charlotte sent you. They'll understand." In this way, things started to happen over and over again in Alabama and some parts of Tennessee. A group of strangers who didn't ask any questions or demand explanations and just gave them food, shelter, and directions to the next stop. Some were white, some were freed black people, and some were slaves who were willing to risk everything to help. Someone they were going to never see again. Sally was amazed at the huge, invisible network that linked these safe houses every time she left one of them. There is a compassionate plot going on right under the noses of the slaveholding class. It is quiet, effective, and very dangerous for everyone involved. Early in January, she crossed into Tennessee. Even though one of the helpers had given her boots, her feet were bleeding and blistered. It was getting cold in the winter, and some nights she could see her. The sound of breath freezing in the air. She wrapped herself in the stolen blanket and kept walking, her children and the shepherd's promise keeping her going. The Ohio River, a huge body of gray water that marked the line between slavery and freedom, came into view in the middle of January. On the northern bank was New Richmond, a small town of freed slaves and abolitionists whose goal was to help slaves who were on the run. In a small boat driven by a black man, Sally crossed the river. He only asked her one question. For the first time crossing, she said, "Second time running." The first time crossing. He just nodded as if this made sense, and that was all he said until they got to the other shore. About 30 buildings were grouped together along the river in New Richmond. Structures that are simple, but clean and well kept. Sally was told to go to a church in the middle of the settlement, where she found a dozen other fugitives who had just arrived and were all looking tired and unable to believe they had made it. And she met the shepherd in that church. She wasn't what Sally thought she would be. She looked like a myth because of the stories, but the woman who approached her was just a woman, maybe 40 years old, with gray streaks in her hair and the calm, judging look of someone who had seen every kind of human desperation and learned not to run away from it. "It was your Sally," she said. It wasn't a question. The shepherd pointed and said, "Yes, ma'am. You made good time faster than I thought." To a seat. "Sit down. You look tired." "I need to go back right away," Sally said. "My children. I know Benjamin told me, but you're not going anywhere right now. You need to rest, heal, and get ready. What you're suggesting is very hard, and if you try to do it right away, you'll fail." Over the next 2 weeks, Sally learned what it would take to go back for her children. The shepherd had done this before, not very often, but enough times to have come up with methods that gave a good chance of. She said the key is that you can't go back the way you came out because Thornton will have more security and be waiting for you when you return. Instead, you'll come in from a different direction, pretending to be a house slave hired from another plantation. I know people in Georgia who can give you fake but convincing papers. You'll need to stay in the area for a few weeks to make yourself look like a real person. Then, when the time is right, you'll run away. You'll take your kids and run, but this time there will be help waiting at every step. It was harder than Sally thought it would be, but it was also more possible. The shepherd had contacts, resources, and experience. She had helped families get back together before. But there was a problem. January and February are the worst months for this kind of operation because the days are short, the weather is unpredictable, and people are keeping a closer eye on their slaves. They said it would be safer to wait until spring, when the days are longer and the roads are busier, instead of trying to escape in the winter. Spring. Sally felt panic rising in her chest. That was months away. What if they sell my children before then? The shepherd agreed that there was a risk, but it was less dangerous than trying to escape in the winter. If you try this now, you'll probably be caught. If you wait, you'll have a real chance. Sally wanted to argue, to insist. It was hard for her to be away from her kids every day, but her first escape taught her an important lesson. Making snap decisions hurts you, but planning ahead gave her a chance, so she agreed to wait. The 3 months she spent in New Richmond were the strangest of her life. For the first time since birth, she was truly free. She could walk wherever she pleased, speak without being asked, and get paid for her work. The people there welcomed her, gave her a place to stay, and several jobs. Families offered her permanent jobs if she chose to stay, but Sally spent every day getting ready to leave. She worked in different homes, pretending to be a hired slave instead of a runaway. She learned new routes, safe houses, and signals, and she saved all the money she made because she knew she would need it for the trip back. Every night, she lay awake thinking about Louisa, Beatrice, Thomas, and Marcus, and she wondered if they thought she had. She wondered if Thornton had told them she had run away and would never come back, and if they hated her for it. The shepherd seemed to know what Sally was thinking. One evening she told her, "They won't hate you. They'll be scared and confused, but they won't hate you because children have a way of understanding love even when they don't understand the circumstances and what you're doing. This is love at its purest." Early in April 1854, the shepherd said that Sally was ready. The plan was made. Fake papers were made that said Sally was a slave named Mary, who had been hired from a plantation in Georgia to work for a family in Grove Hill, Alabama, which was less than 20 meters from the Thornton plantation. She would work there for 3 weeks to set up her cover. On a certain night, she would walk to the Thornton property, find her children, and escape with them using a route that would take them west. In a way that would surprise people on the hunt, they went into Mississippi before turning north. Once you took them, you'd have about 12 hours before the alarm went off. The shepherd said, "That's not much time to get 4 kids far enough away to be safe. You'll need to move quickly, and they must follow your orders without question." "Can they do that?" She was sure. "They can," Sally said. She had taught her kids to be strong and to understand. So they could stay alive, they had to do hard things without being told why. "May God go with you," the shepherd said. "From now on, the plan only works if everything goes right. One mistake, one bad piece of luck, or one person who doesn't do what they're supposed to do, and you'll all be captured." "I understand," Sally said. She didn't say what she was thinking, which was that she would rather die trying to free her children than live safely without them. Their freedom was just. That this wasn't about bravery or heroism, but about the simple, terrible math of a mother's love. On April 12, 1854, Sally Crane went back to Alabama under a fake name and with fake papers that had a plan that had to be carried out perfectly, and with a lot of luck. What she didn't know was that Robert Thornton had been working on his own plan for 4 months, one that would use Sally's love for her children as the trap that would finally break her. Just when we thought we fully understood Sally's journey, everything is about to change. If this story has moved you, please leave a comment, because what comes next will test how much one person can handle. The Larson family in Grove Hill hired Mary. They were exactly what the shepherd had said they would be. Northern transplants who were uncomfortable with slavery, but not so much that they rejected it outright. They felt guilty enough about hiring someone to treat them with some respect. That made them easy to control. Sally worked in their home for 3 weeks and did an excellent job. While learning about the area, she found out which roads were regularly patrolled, which families had dogs, and which plantations had recently had runaway attempts and were therefore on high alert. She also heard news from the Thornton plantation, which Mrs. Larson shared without meaning to. "That terrible business with the Thornton slave," she said one afternoon. As Sally served tea to her guests, Robert Thornton said, "The woman who ran away twice. He is still looking for her. Could you picture? He is sure she will try to get her kids back, but I don't see why she would take that chance. "Where are the kids?" another guest asked. "Oh, they're still there working in the house and fields. Thornton won't sell them because he thinks they're his cover in case the mother comes back. He only wants her back to show her what a bad person she is by whipping her in public or something worse." Sally's hands shook a little as she poured the tea, but she kept her face neutral and put on a perfect mask of polite servitude. The children were still there because Thornton had kept them because he knew Sally would come back, which meant she was right. They were both his weapon against her and her reason to risk everything. On the night of May 1st, 3 weeks after moving to Grove Hill, Sally told Mrs. Elson that her sick sister in town gave her permission to visit that evening. It was a weak lie, but Mrs. Len was already getting ready for bed and too sleepy from her own laudanum to question it closely. Sally left the Larson home with nothing but her clothes on her back and a small bundle of food, water, and a knife. She quickly crossed the dark streets of Groveville and headed south toward the Thornton plantation. She got there around midnight as planned, coming from the west and walking through fields she had once known. The main house, with its dark windows, the slave quarters, and the outbuildings set up like game pieces all looked the same, but something didn't feel right. Sally stopped at the edge of the tree line, her instincts telling her to stop, listen, and wait. The plantation was too quiet. There should have been sounds, like dogs barking, nightbirds singing, and the buildings creaking. Instead, there was thick, oppressive silence. She almost went against her gut and went back into the darkness. But then she saw a small figure come out of the quarters. It was one of the children. She couldn't tell which one it was in the dark, but the size and movement were right. The figure walked toward the well, and Sally's heart skipped a beat. It was one of her children, less than 100 yards away. She stepped out of the tree row and moved. Even though it was dark, Sally could make out her daughter Beatrice's face. She was 10 years old and had lost a lot of weight, but she was still recognizable. "Mama," she said in a whisper. "Yes, baby, it's me. Where are your sister and brothers? They're sleeping in the quarters." "Mama," she replied. "Hush, sweetheart. We don't have time. I need you to wake them up quietly. Tell them to come to the well and don't let anyone else hear." Beatrice said, "Yes," and she ran back to the quarters. It was taking too long, and Sally was tensed up as she waited by the well. Finally, 3 small figures came out of the quarters: Louisa, Thomas, and Marcus. They ran to their mother, and as she held them, Sally had to hold back tears of joy because she could see how much they had grown. Louisa was almost as tall as Sally. Thomas was no longer round like he was when he was young, and Marcus was no longer a toddler but a little boy. "Please be very careful," Sally whispered. "We're leaving right now. Tonight we're going to walk a long way, and it will be hard. But I need you all to be brave and quiet. Don't ask questions. Don't cry. Just follow me and do exactly what I say. Do you understand?" Heads nodded in the dark. "Then let's." William Pike stepped out from behind the smokehouse holding a lantern, with a gun in one hand and a gun in the other. Following him were Robert Thornton and 4 more men, who looked like neighbors and were armed and ready. "I told you she'd come back," Thornton said, and his voice was smug. "I told you all she'd come back for them eventually." Sally pushed her kids behind her and put herself between them and the men. Her mind raced with ideas for ways to get away, but they were surrounded, and the kids were too young to run fast. "Evening, Sally," Pike said. "We've been waiting for you." Sally slowly said, "It's clear now. You knew I was going to come." Thornton stepped closer and said, "Of course I knew. I've been looking for you since March. For the past 6 weeks, men have been waiting here every night. It was never a question of if you'd come back, but when." The kid by the well. Thornton said, "I told Beatrice to go to the well at midnight. I told her that I would give her extra food tomorrow if she did. I thought you were nearby watching. Kids make great bait, don't you think?" Sally was not well. She had gone straight into a trap, and she had stuck her kids in the middle of it. She asked, "What now?" "We need to make a choice now." He told her, "Your escapes have made me look bad twice. You've wasted my time, money, and reputation. The other plantation owners have been asking me why I let you go. I can't control my own property, which makes me look weak. That stops tonight," he said, motioning for Pike to come forward with a rope. "You'll be bound and held until morning, when the entire county can witness what happens to slaves who run. It will be educational and permanent. As for your children, don't," Sally said. "Please, I'll do anything. Do not hurt them." Thornton said, "I wasn't going to hurt them, I was going to sell." They were all sold to people as far apart as possible. "By next week at this time, they'll be spread out from Texas to Florida, and you'll never see them again," he said. "That seems like a fair punishment for your defiance." That's when Sally made her third and final impossible choice. She had run away twice, but her love for her children had brought her back both times. That love had been used against her. Weaponized, they were made into chains that were stronger than iron. Thornton thought he understood this, and had finally won by making her choose between her freedom and the presence of her children. But he was wrong about one important thing. Sally Crane had stopped making decisions based on what she wanted and started making decisions based on what was right. "I have a different proposal," she said quietly. "You're in no position to negotiate. Allow them to leave. Let my kids leave here tonight and have a safe trip north. I'll stay in exchange. I will take any punishment you give me. I'll never try to get away again. While I'm happy to work every day for the rest of my life, my kids are free." The guys laughed. One of them, a Grove Hill plantation owner, said, "That's not how this works, girl. You don't get to bargain." But Thornton put up his hand and stopped them. He was looking at Sally with a genuine interest on his face. "Let me make sure I understand this right," he said. "You're willing to give up any chance of being free, take a harsh punishment, and be a slave for the rest of your life. If you let go of 4 valuable items that belong to me that I can sell for a lot of money." "Yes. Why on earth would I agree to that?" As Sally spoke, her voice became steady and sure. "Being here under those conditions is worth more than selling my children," she said. "Take a look. A slave who would give up her freedom for her. Children's freedom, who would choose to be slaves over free people. That story is very moving. You can use that story to show that slaves would rather live on a plantation where they are safe than be free. That's lies that are more valuable than any children could be sold for." There was a long pause. Thornton was thinking about it and going over the idea in his mind, which Sally could see. "Then you'll have to explain to everyone tomorrow morning why you needed to," he finally asked if I said no. "It took 6 armed men to catch an unarmed woman and 4 children. You'll have to explain why your security was so bad that I was able to escape twice and break into your property a 3rd time. People will ask you about your competence, your control, and the embarrassment you mentioned. Things will get worse, not better." There was more silence. Sally could feel her children pressed against her back, shaking but not speaking. She prayed that they would forgive her for what she was about to do. "I won't sell them," Thornton finally said. "Won't free them either. They'll be sent to work on different plantations and have to come back here every year to fulfill their contracts. They'll be separated, but they'll be alive and well. And you'll stay here under close watch as an example of the selfless motherhood that shows how good our system is. It wasn't freedom, and it wasn't even close to what Sally had hoped for, but it was life. And it was the chance that someday, somehow, her children might find there. "That's right," Sally said. And that was the end of Sally Crane's third escape, not in freedom, but in a different kind of victory that no one watching quite got. The whipping happened at dawn, in front of slaves from 3 different plantations. Thornton made it a show, just as he had promised. Pike gave Sally 20 lashes while she stood tied to a post and didn't make a sound. She told her kids not to watch, but they did. Anyway, lined up with the other slaves to see what their mother was willing to go through for them. When it was over, after Sally had passed out and been taken to the quarters to recover, Thornton spoke to the crowd. He talked about loyalty, the bonds between slaves and masters, and how Sally's decision to go back showed that freedom wasn't always better than knowing one's place. As Sally had predicted, it was propaganda, but it was also her children's lives. As Thornton had promised, the children were sent to different plantations under strict rules. Louisa went to live with a family in Grove Hill who needed a house girl, and Beatrice was sent to a plantation near Mobile. Thomas and Marcus, who were too young for serious work but old enough to learn, were placed with farmers who paid Thornton a small fee every year for their work. They could only see their mother on Christmas Day for 1 hour. Sally lived on the Thornton plantation for another 17 years. The slave worked in the main house until she got too old to handle the physical demands of the job. After that, she did lighter work like fixing clothes, shelling peas, and watching over the younger house slaves. She never tried to escape again, and she never told anyone about her 3 trips that might have recorded them. But the story got around, as slave stories always did, in whispered conversations, coded spirituals, and the invisible network that linked every slave. The woman who escaped 3 times and came back for her children became a legend. It was told over and over again until it became like a myth. Some versions said she had magical powers, others said she made a deal with the devil, and still others said she was helped by angels dressed as abolitionists. The truth was simpler and stranger. Sally Crane was just a mother who loved her children more than she loved freedom, and knew that sometimes the most radical thing is not the most radical thing at all. There is some disagreement about what happened to the children after they were freed in 1865 because records from that time aren't complete, and the Thornton plantation was partially burned down during a raid in the last few months of the Civil War. However, there are pieces of information. For example, census records from 1870 show that 4 people with the last name Crane lived in different parts of Alabama and Mississippi. A letter from a woman named Louisa Crane to a freedmen's school in Ohio in 1873 was found in an archive of the Ohio Historical Society. She asked about educational opportunities for her children and said that her mother had taught her to read in secret when she was a child. Most interestingly, in 1868, the New Richmond Settlement newspaper reported the arrival of an elderly former slave woman who said she had met the shepherd 20 years earlier and was returning to thank her. The woman's name was not recorded, but the article did say that she was from Alabama and had 4 adult children. There is some weak but strong evidence that this was Sally Crane. We do know for sure that Sally died in 1870 at age 47, never having left Clark County, Alabama, after her 3rd return. She was buried in the small cemetery behind the quarters in an unmarked grave among dozens of other unmarked graves. But the fact that her story lived on, that it was remembered, told again, and finally written down, suggests that her choices meant something to the people who saw them. Some historians say Sally Crane made a mistake and should have gone north and never looked back. They say Thornton used her maternal instinct to help the slaveholding class, and that her story was used as propaganda to support a bad system. These historians are probably right, but other historians say Sally Crane made a mistake, and she should have gone north and never looked back. Historians say that Sally Crane knew something that her slave owners never did. Real freedom isn't just about where you live or who controls your work. It's also about being able to make choices that reflect your values, even if they cost you a lot. They say that by going back 3 times, she kept a level of independence that sheer escape could never have given her. These historians are probably also right. The truth about slavery is complicated, painful, and doesn't make sense. We're left with the story of a woman who ran away 3 times, came back 3 times, and was caught once. She made a choice that cost her freedom but saved her children. We can't say from this far away in time whether that choice was right or wrong, heroic or tragic. But we can say that Sallie Crane made impossible choices with impossible courage. And her story, told over and over again, continues to ask us the same question. What would you give up for the people you love? Would you be strong enough to do that 3 times, knowing full well what it would cost each time? Sallie Crane, an Alabama slave, never got away to be free for good, but she found a way to choose 3 times. Maybe that was its own kind of freedom in the end. The Tum River still flows through Clark County, Alabama. The Thornton plantation is long gone, replaced by modern farms and suburban developments. There is no historical marker or monument to honor Sallie Crane or her 3 escapes and 3 returns. But the story lives on, told in whispers among families and written down in bits and pieces of letters, diaries, and oral histories. It is a story that asks us to think about what we do with our lives. Remember that history is made by both those who ran away and those who came back. They did it because they loved someone or something, were trapped by their circumstances, or had to make impossible decisions during impossible times. And if you listen carefully on some nights in some quiet places in western Alabama, some say you can still hear the sound of a woman walking south when everyone thought she should run north, coming back over and over for the children she could never quite save or abandon. That is Sallie Crane's story. People made choices in a world that was meant to take away their choices. This mystery will live on long after the people who made the choices have died. It shows us that the past is never as simple as we'd like it to be, and the choices people made in slavery still challenge our ideas about freedom, love, and sacrifice. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who value these hard but necessary histories. These are the stories that must never be forgotten.